Howdy YouTube, Matt back, and today's topic sucks. Today I want to talk to you about the shop vac and more specifically about the Oneida Dust Deputy that I have hooked up to it. This thing is fantastic. If you have a shop vac and you don't have one of these, you are wasting a lot of time, frankly, and money. This is one of those gizmos that pays for itself by saving you from going through filter after filter on the vac itself. This is not, a commercial for the Dust Deputy. In fact, today is about what's wrong with my Dust Deputy setup. The biggest and worst problem really is the way that I have all the hoses attached to this thing. They are just pressed on. I at one point had them duct taped in place, but that's a pain. The duct tape dries up and it peels off and then it leaves sticky stuff behind, and how it peels off and is still sticky is beyond me. So these are just pressed on here, which means that they just pull off. Lots of times, in fact, this one just pulls off even with the vacuum on and generating the suction pressure while I'm trying to drag the thing around the shop. This hose stays on, but as you can see, it's got a pretty severe bend in it. And that bend is actually steep enough that there's a gap. I can get my finger up in here. So I get a fair amount of air leakage, meaning that I'm losing suction. It's coming in here and going straight into the vac, and it's not vacuuming up anything I'm after. Additionally, this hose is really longer than it needs to be. It goes down, it curls around. It reduces airflow sort of unnecessarily. There's the fact that this is just not sturdy. I have a spacer block bolted in here because the tub of the vac goes in. And this is a 2-bucket system. The bucket of dirt comes out of a different bucket that's the one that's actually attached to the vacuum. And I pulled that out for just a second so that maybe we can get a close-up of what's going on here. I put a flashlight inside here, you can see it a little better. Hello! Big crack in this bucket. And it's not the first one either. Plastic buckets, even if you spring for a relatively good one, are just not strong enough when they're mounted to the vacuum in sort of one line, if you will, with a couple of screws. Eventually, the weight of the other bucket filling up and dragging it around by the hose just rips this thing clean off the vac. All of which begs the question, what do I intend to do about this? Couple of different things. First and foremost, what I want to do is I want to go ahead and separate these two things. I want to make the cyclone and bucket arrangement something that stands alone so that it could be easily left behind if I want to take the shop vac with me somewhere. The second thing I want to do is I want to replace the shop vac hose with some PVC pipe that will be solid, airtight, and rigid, won't be putting all this strain on the cyclone and the bucket lid. And the third thing I want to do is I want to create some sort of strain relief for this hose. I want to be able to give the hose a good solid yank to get it around workbench, table saw, legs, and such things without having to worry about pulling it off of here and without having to solve the problem by permanently attaching this hose to the cyclone. Because once in a while you suck up a leaf or a shop rag or something and you need to be able to get in here to fish it out. So I don't want to glue this or screw it or anything like that. I want this to be able to come off, but only when I want it to come off. I guess step one is you got to take this bad boy apart so that I can detach this from this. I thought since I got to this point, I might as well do the obligatory, what percentage of dust did the Dust Deputy catch versus what's in the shop vac. 2 caveats. One, I'm not 100% sure that I didn't use the shop vac without the Dust Deputy at some point. Certainly, the vac was not new when I put the Dust Deputy on it. So the inside of this thing is dirty from previous use. But those asterisks notwithstanding, let's cut over to ye old GoPro and take a look inside these buckets. All right, I suppose the first thing we got to do is we got to take the lid off of this thing and see what's in there. And there's quite a bit. I'm going to say this is half the bucket. Ish, something like that. Of course, here I am throwing the dust around everywhere. I don't know how long it's taken me to accumulate that. It's an interesting collection of sawdust and genuine dirt and leaves and pieces of styrofoam. So you see there's a good mix of fine and coarse stuff that has been filtered out by the cyclone. All right, let's take the lid off this bad boy and see what's in here. Ooh, this thing was not brand new when I put the Cyclone on here, so projects like drywall and fireplace ash were done previously, and that's probably where a lot of that dust came from. And the filter, you know, certainly has some dirt and fuzz and things on it, but it's in really good shape, especially when you consider how much was in the bucket. Had I run all of that stuff into the tub of the vac, this filter would be a disaster. There are 6 screws, you can see 3 of them here at the top, that hold this bucket onto the block of wood that's my spacer from the tub. They all had stepped sets of washers on them, a small one and a bigger one, and you can see that still this thing has cracked right here next to the screw. Just gonna pop all those out. Kind of nice that they all fall in the bucket. I'm going to leave the spacer block on there simply because if I took it off, I'd have 3 air holes in the tub. Okay, I've got this thing broken into 2 pieces and then reassembled sort of temporarily so I can use it while I'm doing this build. I still have the hose running from the top of the Cyclone to the vac, and this just pressed on here. I did drop this bucket into the bucket that I'm using for my driveway salt. So this is good and heavy. I can pretty much rock that around until I think I'm going to break the lid, and it's not going anywhere. So that already is a pretty big improvement, but I don't want this taking up more floor space. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build myself a little box to set this thing in. Someday maybe it'll become a silencing case for the shop vac, and then that will give us a place to put this up top before we start routing the PVC. My vac box slash Cyclone Platform couldn't be any simpler. I've got a piece of plywood for the bottom, I've got a piece of plywood for the top, and I've got these 2x4s which are cut to 30 inches long to make 4 corner posts. The easiest and strongest way that I have available to me to attach all of this together is ye old pocket hole jig. Now I'm going to throw these legs in here, and I'm going to drill pocket holes on both ends so that I can attach both the top and the bottom. The ease of cutting these holes with a jig is sort of the first thing that leads people to look at pocket screws. But to me, the more important aspect is how easy it is to get things assembled tightly and square. It's a matter of having the right clamp, and pocket holes are popular enough that pretty much any clamp you could want exists. In this case, I have a bench dog clamp, which is seated down in one of my pocket hole screws and giving me a nice flush face to make sure that my 2x4 leg is exactly even with the edge of the plywood. I just chuck up the screw in the second hole, and off we go. Alrighty, one box frame holding a shop vac and a bucket on top of it. I left this thing plenty big so that I could get, you know, a taller shop vac at some day. And I left plenty of space the whole way around because I do envision at some point putting sides in here, maybe some acoustic treatment, something to quiet that vac down. The next problem that I have to solve is getting the plumbing from here down to the shop vac. That is a little bit of an art because shop vac hose and PVC fittings don't come in interchangeable sizes. So let's go over to the workbench and I'll show you what I did about that. All right, folks, this is a 2-inch PVC elbow. This is what they call a long bend elbow. It gives you a more gentle sweep, which is definitely friendlier to dust debris and just generally air moving through here. The fundamental problem, however, is that this, and what this is a coupler that goes on the vacuum itself, representative of the diameter and thickness and whatever of the hose that we're working with. It's just not the same. 2-inch PVC pipe is nominally 2 inches, really in change on the inside, and it's some other crazy dimensions on the outside. This stuff is supposedly 2¼ inch vac hose, but that's sort of an outside dimension. So what happens is this will fit inside the coupling, but it won't fit inside the actual pipe. And then obviously vice versa. There's just no good way to stick these 2 things together. So I can make my nice little apparatus to connect with the PVC and the elbows and what have you, but at some point I got to connect it to this to plug into the vacuum, and I need it to connect to the top of the Cyclone. So enter this. This is a 2-inch flexible coupling. It's flexible when it's not 10 degrees. But anyway, this thing is rubber, and it's close enough to the size that we need that we can, with just a little bit of electrical tape, build this up to the point where it's a snug fit in there and clamp it down. Then obviously on the other end, it's perfectly sized for 2-inch PVC pipe. So this will be how we're going to make the transition from the shop vac to the PVC, and then on the other end from the PVC to the top of the Cyclone. Well, gang, here's what it looks like once you get the whole thing sort of piped in. It's not what I would call done. A wire tie on the leg of the box is not what I'm going to do long term for strain relief, but I think it's going to do it for at least this part of working on the shop vac. The PVC probably isn't necessary. The flexible hose, works, but even without any of these joints glued, this is a much tighter seal than I had where that hose bent. It's also bigger around on the inside than the hose was, so I get, in theory, better flow through here, along with the straight, smooth sides instead of this corrugated stuff. There's really no strain on the Dust Deputy here at all. I've got half the weight of the PVC sitting on here, and the other half of the weight is down on the shop vac fitting, and plus whatever little bit of hose is right here. Certainly nothing to worry about, nothing that's going to do any damage to the lid of the bucket over time. And because all of this is just pressed together and flexible, getting the lid off of the bucket, getting the bucket out is still pretty simple. But that's going to be all she wrote for today. Questions, comments, leave them below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, all that fun, happy stuff. In the meantime, stay safe, YouTube.